The chandeliers of Carlton House burned with a brilliance that mocked the quiet dread coiling beneath Lady Eleanor Harcourt's ribs. Lights scattered across the ballroom in glittering fragments, illuminating faces painted with delight, envy, or hunger, expressions the tongue wore more naturally than sincerity. Eleanor stepped into that swirling sea of silk and diamonds with the unassuming grace she had mastered since girlhood, hoping, perhaps foolishly, to pass unseen. Yet whispers found her within moments, brushing against her ears like cold fingers seeking purchase. "The Duke said she is like a sister," someone murmured behind a jeweled fan. "Imagine the mortification," another replied, soft but sharp enough to pierce. Eleanor kept her chin lifted as though made of porcelain, knowing any crack would give society permission to shatter her entirely. Arthur Pembroke, Duke of Ashford, stood across the room in a cluster of diplomats and noblemen, his manner serenely composed, his expression unreadable beneath the sculpted discipline bred into men of his rank. To Eleanor, he had always been Arthur first, her childhood companion, her intellectual rival, her dependable constant in a world that rarely offered stability. But tonight he was unmistakably the Duke, a man carved from expectation and duty, and the sight sent a flicker of distance through her heart. When he finally approached, the crowd parted out of instinctive deference. His bow was elegant, his smile polite, yet something in his eyes carried a faint hesitation. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted, his voice perfectly modulated, offering neither warmth nor offense. "I trust the evening finds you well." She managed a steady breath, willing her voice not to betray her. "Quite well, Your Grace. And you?" He inclined his head. "As well as one may be amid this endless season." A harmless remark, spoken gently enough. But then, too loudly, too carelessly, he added, "After all, we are nearly family. You know you are like a sister to me." The words hung between them, ringing louder than the orchestra. A ripple spread through the nearby spectators, a rustle of shocked delight that confirmed the statement had not gone unnoticed. Something tightened in Eleanor's lungs. She could not show it, of course. She had been raised to wear dignity like armor, even when it cut her from the inside. She smiled with quiet composure, though her fingers curled imperceptibly against the silk of her gown. He thought he was shielding her, she knew, trying to smother harmful speculation before it could ignite. But his attempt at protection created another wound entirely, one she could not acknowledge without revealing her true feelings, which society would ridicule far more cruelly than unrequited affection. Before Arthur could continue, a new voice entered the moment with a warm, steady timbre that contrasted sharply with the Duke's controlled reserve. "Lady Eleanor," Captain Henry Barrett said, bowing with the subtle flourish of a man accustomed to danger, admiration, and command. When he straightened, the ballroom light caught the faint scar near his temple, a silent testament to Waterloo, and his gaze held a sincerity few men dared display so openly. Eleanor had met him only twice before, brief encounters filled with polite pleasantries, yet tonight his attention fell upon her as though she were the most luminous presence in the hall. "You look radiant this evening," he said, soft enough that the comment felt meant solely for her, yet strong enough to draw passing glances. "If the stars had eyes, I dare say they would envy yours." Heat rose to her cheeks, not from the flattery itself but from the unexpectedness of it. She was unaccustomed to being praised, especially by a man whose presence caused ladies to preen and men to stiffen with comparison. Henry's compliment felt like stepping into sunlight after years of believing oneself suited only for shadows. Arthur's posture shifted, barely perceptible but unmistakable to Eleanor, who had known him long enough to interpret the smallest change. His hand, previously relaxed at his side, curled with quiet tension. Though his face remained composed, a flicker, quick, unguarded, crossed his gaze. It was not anger nor disdain, but something far more unsettling, unease. For a heartbeat, the Duke looked almost human beneath his marble exterior, and Eleanor found herself suddenly breathless. Henry offered his arm. "May I have the honor of the next dance?" The question was courteous, but there was an undercurrent in his tone, a daring challenge to the unspoken boundaries that had long confined her life. She accepted, too startled by her own boldness to hesitate. "Yes, Captain. I would be delighted." As he escorted her toward the dance floor, the orchestra's melody swelled into a waltz, its rhythm coaxing forth a hush of anticipation. Eleanor felt the air shift around her, the scent of roses and beeswax mingling with a sensation she had not felt in years: possibility. From across the ballroom, Arthur watched them. His expression remained impeccably calm, a duke observing an unremarkable social interaction. But his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When Henry placed a respectful hand at Eleanor's waist, Arthur's breath hitched. So subtly the world would never detect it, but enough for the narrator of any life, even a quiet one, to notice. He had called her his sister, yet the sight of another man drawing laughter from her lips struck him with a force he had no defense prepared for. Eleanor moved with Henry across the polished floor, unsure whether her sudden lightness came from the music or from the freedom of being seen as a woman rather than a familial attachment. Henry guided her with confidence, his steps steady, his eyes kind. "Forgive my boldness," he murmured, "but I do not think the world has looked at you properly." She met his gaze, startled. "And how should it look at me, Captain?" "As I do," he replied, "with admiration rather than assumption." Her heart gave an uncertain flutter, and Henry smiled, just enough to reveal the warmth beneath his military composure. It was intoxicating, not because he was handsome, but because he acknowledged what others had dismissed. In that brief exchange, Eleanor felt seen in a way Arthur had never allowed himself to see her. When the waltz ended, Henry bowed, and Eleanor curtsied, her breath unsteady though she hid it well. As she stepped back, she sensed Arthur's presence before she saw him. His shadow fell across the marble like a warning. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly, "a word, if you please." His voice was too calm, too controlled, the tone he used when something inside him threatened to unravel. But she had no chance to reply. Another partner approached, requesting her hand for the next set, and Henry encouraged her forward with a gentle nod. Caught between politeness and confusion, Eleanor accepted. Arthur stood motionless as she walked away, his expression unreadable. Yet something in his stillness carried the weight of a man who had seen the ground shift beneath him for the first time. And as Eleanor moved into the dance, her heart thrumming, she could not shake the inexplicable sensation that the night had cracked open a door neither she nor Arthur could ever close again. The weeks that followed unfurled with a strange, shimmering tension that Eleanor could neither explain nor escape. Where once she had drifted through the London season in quiet obscurity, she now found herself at the center of an attention that felt both exhilarating and perilous. Captain Henry Barrett's interest did not fade with the novelty of a ballroom encounter. Instead, it deepened with a steady sincerity that unsettled the tongue and bewildered Eleanor. Flowers arrived at Harcourt House, white lilies, elegant and understated, with a note written in Henry's bold, disciplined hand. "For the lady whose laughter makes the hour gentler." Eleanor read the message twice before hiding it in her desk drawer, uncertain whether she feared discovery or her own fluttering delight. Her mother, though fond of Henry's good reputation, grew uneasy under society's scrutiny. "You must tread carefully, Eleanor," she warned one morning over tea, her voice tight with maternal caution. "A soldier's admiration is sweet, but the tongue's appetite for gossip is far stronger than its appetite for truth." Eleanor nodded, but the warning could not extinguish the fragile, glowing warmth Henry had kindled within her. For the first time, she felt the world shift and make space for her, not as an accessory to someone else's life, but as a woman with a presence worth noticing. Yet Arthur Pembroke's demeanor toward her had grown increasingly perplexing. He was neither distant nor intimate, neither cold nor affectionate, but hovered in a space that left her constantly guessing. At soirees he appeared beside her without warning, interrupting conversations under the guise of courteous concern, offering a glass of punch, a seat near the fire, an introduction she did not need. His eyes lingered too long, yet his words remained frustratingly neutral. The more Henry's attention warmed, the more Arthur's behavior chilled into something she could not decipher. One evening at Lady Ellsworth's gathering, Henry approached Eleanor near the windows overlooking the moonlit gardens. "May I steal a moment of your company?" he asked with that modest, earnest charm that made refusal impossible. She agreed, though she sensed the weight of Arthur's gaze from across the room. Henry escorted her to a quieter alcove draped with velvet curtains, where the music softened enough for intimacy without impropriety. "I hope my letters have not overwhelmed you," Henry said, his hands clasped behind his back as though restraining emotion with military precision. Eleanor smiled. They were kind, and kindness is seldom overwhelming. His relief showed in the softening around his eyes. "I care for your comfort, Lady Eleanor. Sincerely." She felt her breath catch, and Henry, emboldened, continued. "You have a gentleness this city does not deserve. And I—" He hesitated, searching for words that would not overstep. "I find myself thinking of you more than propriety encourages." Before Eleanor could answer, a shadow moved behind the curtain. Arthur, his expression slate-like, his presence a silent rebuke. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly, "your mother seeks you. She is concerned about the draft from the window." It was a flimsy excuse. There was no draft. Henry straightened, jaw tense, yet he bowed with polished courtesy. "Of course, Your Grace." But Arthur's refusal to acknowledge him suggested something far colder than politeness. Eleanor followed Arthur, her pulse quickening with frustration. "You need not interrupt every conversation I have," she murmured when they were far enough from curious ears. "I am perfectly capable of conducting myself appropriately." Arthur's stride slowed. "I am aware," he replied, though his tone held a strain she had never heard before. "But Captain Barrett's attentions are enthusiastic. Too enthusiastic." Eleanor's breath hitched. "And why does that trouble you?" He turned, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made the world feel briefly suspended. "Because you deserve caution. You deserve thought. Not reckless infatuation." "Is that what you believe he offers me?" she whispered. Arthur's jaw tightened. "I believe he offers what he knows: impulse, emotion, and the thrill of admiration." His voice dipped, faintly unsteady. "But admiration fades." Eleanor felt something sharp twist inside her. "And what do you offer, Arthur? Familial affection? Detached guardianship?" The words wounded him. She saw it in the slight flinch he tried to mask. "I offer stability," he answered quietly, "and a lifetime free of disappointment." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her, yet the hollowness beneath it stung. "But not affection?" she asked. "Not anything more?" A muscle flickered near his temple. "Affection," he said, barely audible, "is not always safe." She waited for more, for the truth she sensed quivering beneath his restraint, but he stepped back as though proximity burned him. The tension between them only intensified in the days that followed. Eleanor tried to find distance, but the world seemed determined to propel her into moments she did not seek yet could not avoid. The most damning came during a visit to the Ashford estate, where her mother insisted they attend a small gathering hosted by Arthur's aunt. Rain trapped the guests indoors, and Eleanor soon found herself in the conservatory, a sanctuary of damp glass and quiet greenery, seeking respite from suffocating propriety. She had barely settled when Henry entered, equally eager for refuge. "I feared the storm had swept you away," he joked, offering a warm smile. She laughed softly, grateful for the comfort of his presence. They discussed books, travel, even the peculiar habits of finches hopping restlessly outside the rain-streaked glass. When a delicate ribbon slipped from her sleeve, Henry retrieved it, holding it up with a teasing flourish before placing it gently into her hand. The touch was brief, respectful, yet to anyone watching, dangerously intimate. Unbeknownst to either of them, a maid stood at the doorway long enough to witness the moment, her eyes widening with scandalous delight. By evening, whispers raced through the estate like wildfire. Compromised, impropriety, alone together. Eleanor felt the ground tilt as the rumors reached her mother. Then Arthur. Henry tried to defend her dignity, confronting Arthur with controlled fury. "If you will not claim her," he said, voice low with restrained anger, "then cease holding her life in suspension." Arthur's reply was icy. "I will not let a man use her reputation as a battlefield on which to fight for his pride." Henry's eyes darkened. Perhaps it is your pride that fears the contest. That night, Arthur sought Eleanor with a conflicted urgency. Instead of addressing the rumors directly, he presented her with an emerald hairpin, an heirloom of exquisite craftsmanship. A token of friendship, he said, though his voice wavered. She studied him, pained. Your Grace, you must not confuse pity with affection. His breath faltered. It is not pity. But when she waited for more, he said nothing. His silence carved a hollow in her heart. The next morning, overwhelmed by scandal and confusion, Eleanor announced her intention to leave London for Bath. She needed quiet. She needed air. What she did not know, what she could not see, was Arthur standing alone in the corridor after overhearing her decision, gripping the balustrade as though the entire estate had begun to crumble beneath him. The rain outside drowned his breath, but not the truth surfacing relentlessly within him. The thought of her absence was unbearable. And yet, bound by fear and pride, he let her go. The following days unfolded with a strange, breathless rhythm, as though the very air of Ashford Hall had thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. Eleanor moved through the estate with outward composure, yet every echoing footstep reminded her of the moment Arthur's gaze had betrayed something fierce and unfamiliar, something she hardly dared name. She had always believed her heart was disciplined, shaped by years of managing expectations, performing duties, and accepting boundaries, yet now found that certainty wavering with every recollection of his strained voice and unguarded eyes. On the third morning after the ball, Eleanor discovered him in the library, not reading but staring blankly at an open volume, its pages unmoved by the faint breeze from the tall windows. She approached with her customary grace, though her hands trembled slightly within her sleeves. He looked up at once, his expression tightening with a mixture of relief and longing he attempted to smother. Their exchange began with politeness, both of them clinging to familiar roles, yet the politeness soon frayed beneath the quiet pressure of everything left unsaid. Their conversation might have ended there had Captain Barrett not entered the library moments later, having returned a borrowed atlas from the estate's map room. His easy confidence filled the quiet space, and his warm greeting to Eleanor caused heat to rise in Arthur's chest. Barrett thanked her again for their conversation at the ball, adding that he hoped to speak with her further at the evening's gathering. She answered with poised courtesy, unaware that her gentleness only deepened the storm in Arthur's thoughts and sharpened the tension in the room. Unable to endure the uncertainty, Arthur finally confessed that the sight of her with another man had unsettled him more than he wished to admit. Eleanor, startled yet quietly emboldened, asked why it should trouble him if he truly saw her as nothing more than a sister. His silence extended between them like a drawn breath, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost strained, as though he feared the consequences of the truth. He told her he no longer believed the words he had once relied upon. They had been a barrier he used to hide behind, not an honest sentiment. Before either could find the courage to continue, one of the house staff interrupted with news that the carriage was prepared for the afternoon visits, a reminder of obligations neither could ignore. They parted with careful restraint, each step away from the other heavy with unfinished confessions. Later, at Lady Crosby's gathering, the crowded rooms and lively conversation offered distraction, yet both felt strangely alone despite the dozens of elegantly dressed guests. Barrett approached Eleanor with an effortless charm that drew glances from nearby onlookers, and though she answered him with kindness, she could not dismiss the memory of Arthur's earlier admission. When a brief rain shower forced guests to cluster near the great windows, Arthur found Eleanor standing slightly apart, observing the silver streaks against the glass. He approached with cautious resolve, insisting he wished only for a moment of truth. She granted it, though her pulse raced as he spoke. He admitted that he had buried his feelings because he feared the implications of wanting someone he believed he could not rightfully claim, someone he thought deserved a man unburdened by duty. Eleanor answered with quiet honesty, confessing that she had spent years dismissing any emotion that threatened their equilibrium, yet she could no longer pretend those emotions were absent. The evening ended with no clear resolution, only a deeper ache that resisted quieting. When the carriages arrived, Arthur offered his arm to Eleanor, and though she accepted, neither spoke during the ride home. The lanterns along the road cast fleeting gold across her face, illuminating the conflict he longed to ease. By the time they reached Ashford Hall, both understood that silence no longer protected them, it merely prolonged the inevitable reckoning. Whether they would face that reckoning together or apart remained uncertain, but the fragile balance between them could not endure unchanged. Yet as they stepped into the quiet entrance hall, a shift lingered in the air, an unspoken promise they could not deny. Each sensed that the days ahead would test courage in ways upbringing had not prepared them for, drawing them toward a truth none wished to surrender to face.